and thank all of you for being here. I'd like to begin by just having a moment of silence for our slave ancestors who came across in the Middle Passage and who withstood the burdens of slavery and segregation. And it is on their shoulders that we stand. And because tonight we are coming together here on the 20th anniversary of the first Black Community Crusade for Children meeting in Lazio, Italy, and some of those great folk who convened us and who were present and guided us and no longer with us, and I want to remember them, and I want us to have a moment of silence and gratitude for them. Dr. John Hope Franklin, Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, Henry Hampton, Judge Leon Higginbotham, brilliant young organizer Lisa Sullivan, and Dr. John Turner, who is the Dean of the School of Social Work at the University of North Carolina. Thank you. We gather here to continue their work and to take the work and the seeds that they planted to scale and to build the movement that our children must need if they're not to go backwards. And the whole promise of freedom and the whole promise of the American dream is that our children would do better than we do and have a better life than we did. And we are on our watch letting that dream fail. And millions of our children are going to end up worse off than we adults unless we act and build the movement that we're here to build. And we're very proud of what we've achieved in the last 20 years since the Black Community Crusade for Children was started. We did it quietly. We didn't announce anything. We started testing new strategies. We tried to train some new young leaders, many of whom are among you tonight. We're exceedingly proud of the 90,000 young people, children K to 19, 18, who went through the CDF Freedom Schools and the BCC's Freedom Schools. And many of them have become leaders. And the 9,000 college students who trained and became interns and intern trainers, and many of them are teachers and educators, some of whom you will meet and hear from in this meeting. We're very proud of them. We need to have freedom schools everywhere. We need to have them in every church. We need to have them in every school. We need to have them in every youth detention facility. We need to have them as re-entry points for the children who have been incarcerated. We need to have them in homeless shelters. We need to give our children hope, let them believe in themselves, have high expectations for themselves, and have caring adults who are there to tell them, yes, they are sacred, and yes, there is hope for the future. So one of the agendas here is how do we take the 142 freedom schools and double them, triple them, quadruple them, but to have a safe haven that teaches our children to read and to love reading and to do well in school and to learn how to resolve conflicts nonviolently, how to get parents engaged in how they can support their children's learning. But we're proud of the freedom schools. Now how do we take them to scale and to quality, and what is our role, all of us, in seeing that that happens, because so many of our children are on the streets in the summer and in the streets in the afternoon, and they're being taken over by the gangs and the drug dealers. Where are we? The gangs and the drug dealers are open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. How many hours are our church doors open? How many hours are our school doors open? How many hours are our community organization doors open? Open up those doors. And so I want you to leave here with a commitment to say how many of you are going to start freedom schools and to free our children from the illiteracy and the violence in the streets and the low self-esteem. But that's some of those things that works, and I'm just very proud of them, and I thank our Freedom School family for all they have done. I'm so proud of Jeff Canada and the Harlem Children's Zone, and they've shown what we all know, that if you give children a comprehensive continuum of services, that they can succeed, and they need to bring the community together. And Jeff and a bunch of others sat over in that lodge over there, conceptualized. We went out and did it. And here now, with Angela's help and a lot of other people in this room who applied for Promise Zone grants, we're trying to figure out how we take the Harlem Children's Zone model to scale. And you're going to hear from him on that, but just so proud of him. And everybody asks, you know, can we all be like Jeff Canada? I said, Jeff Canada wasn't really Jeff Canada 20 years ago. He was a struggling young man. And I used to remember when he thought he couldn't talk, couldn't make a great speech, couldn't write. Look at this man who's grown into this incredible leader, Superman. But But again, a community of caring, but all the gifts, we've got all the gifts in our community that we need to cause the movement we're going to have that's going to save our children and save America's soul. I'm very proud of Oleta Fitzgerald and her leadership in the Southern Regional Office of the BCCC. She has, thanks to her leadership, created, with Winifred Green and a number of other allies, the Southern Rural Black Women's Initiative to economically and politically empower Black women in 72 rural Black Belt counties in Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama and Georgia. And it's wonderful to behold. And they have provided intergenerational leadership to these Black women, but also to young women through the Unita Blackwell Leadership Training Institute at Tougaloo College that Winifred Green has been so instrumental in. And I'm very proud of the fact that they have implemented the SPARK program funded by the Kellogg Foundation, getting our children ready for school. Over 800, 900 children have gotten ready for school and are doing well and achieving in school. And that has been in 5 Mississippi districts, and that will be expanded to 10 districts because of the good work of Oleta in the Southern Regional Office. Really proud of the young preachers that are coming up, and I see Mr. Warnock. We've got a whole group of what we call Joshua Deborah preachers who have come out of the Samuel Whit Proctor Child Advocacy Ministry Institute, because the church has got to become the church again and to speak for social justice for children and to stand in the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we are going to be hearing from one of our Moses Miriam generation preachers, Reverend Otis Moss Jr., in the course of this conference. But you're going to hear from Dr. Warnock, and you're going to hear from Dr. Leslie Callahan and many others, and we're very proud of all of them. But the church has got to be the church again. And it's got to open up its doors and speak for that poor baby that we, who are Christians, believe was God's entrance into history. And when somebody said, why in the world are you having this meeting right before Christmas? I said, well, because we needed this meeting right before Christmas. This is Advent season, and may that poor baby find a place in our hearts, and we say yes to him, and that we will say yes to the poor babies all around who are still not welcome in our inn. So what better season than Advent season to be holding this meeting to free our children from poverty and from illiteracy and from violence and from suffering. This is our work as Christians and as people who care. Very proud of the thousands and thousands of young people who have come to Haley Farm, and I'm proud of Haley Farm, and I hope you'll have time. This is our home for building the children's movement, to bring people together across disciplines and across faiths and across ages and across networks to sort of build that movement. It's going to take all of us, and the movement's not going to be built in Washington. It's going to be built in your communities and the work that you're doing. And we've got enough people in this house tonight to build that powerful, transforming movement, to pick up where Dr. King and others left off. And that is why we are here today. But we've got a bunch of young servant leaders, and there are 2 or 3 generations of them that are represented here tonight. The first Black Student Leadership Network for Children. My goodness, they're getting older. My first child became 40 this year. We've got some 45, 6, 7-year-olds who are doing extraordinary things, and you're going to hear from representatives of that first generation that Lisa Sullivan and others raised. But you also got young people who came and come to the young adult leadership training programs here to become servant leaders, and you will hear some of them speak. You're going to see a number of the interns that have been present, and you're going to see some of the beat the odds young people, and I wish all of you could celebrate children who are beating the odds. We got so sick of all the media folk who portrayed our children as killing somebody, or always on drugs, or always dropping out of schools and doing wrong things. Most of our children are struggling and trying to beat the odds, while we sit around and try to, not being fast enough in changing the odds. But we've got beat the odds. About 600 young people have gone off to college, and you'll hear from representatives of them who come through extraordinary adversities and who have gone on to college, and they have become teachers and lawyers and doctors and Peace Corps volunteers, and I'm so proud of them. I don't know what to do. And when you hear them, you will know that the next generation is ready to carry on this struggle. We've had a number of public education and awareness campaigns. When we did our first poll of Black students and Black parents, we were surprised to learn 16 years ago that their first concern was not just education or teenage pregnancy, it was violence and the fear that their children would not live to adulthood. And so we listened. And we began an child gun violence campaign, awareness campaign, and the grassroots networks, and Ray Hammond, Dr. Ray Hammond, you're going to hear from Boston's 10-Point Coalition and others, began to mobilize to see how they could stop, had been mobilizing to see how they could stop gun violence, but that campaign, I think, made a difference, but it needs to make a bigger difference because we've just completed the preliminary analysis of the new poll that from Hart Associates, which you'll hear some results from tomorrow, and violence is still, gang violence and gun violence is still a prime concern of children and of parents. We have lost more black children since we began to keep statistics by age in 1979, and we do an annual child and gun violence report. And when we began these reports, 16 children a day were being killed by guns. Today, it's 9 children a day, but that's still a moral obscenity, and 5 times as many of them are being injured by guns. But we have lost more children since 1979 to violence than we lost 10 times as many children as we lost in gun violence, to gun violence, than we lost in all of the lynchings of black people in American history. But where is our anti-lynching movement? We lose more children to gun violence every year than we, a little over 3,000 every year. That's more than the American military battle casualties in Afghanistan in the 8 or 9 years since that war began. We've got no anti-war movement. It's time for us to stand up and say we're going to stop the killing of our children. We lose more preschool children to gun violence each year than police officers who die in the line of duty, and yet we are silent. So we're here to see what we're going to do. Now, we've got lots of progress and other things that we could cite, and I hope you will look in your brochure and your thing and packet, and you will see a description of a lot of the seeds that have been planted, but seeds don't become oak trees overnight. You have to keep watering them and nurturing them, and that's our job, is to keep watering and nurturing them and making sure now that they reach full maturity and that children hear our voices, and that we take so many of the wonderful things that so many of you in this room are already doing, best practices, because we know what to do to save our children. We know how to run good health programs. We know how to run good comprehensive programs. We know how to run a lot of the after-school programs and freedom schools. You know what to do. How do we now band together and make them big and make them visible and make them reach a critical mass of all of our children? But we come celebrating the progress at a time when I think Jeff and Angela and I both, we feel that despite the progress that has been made, despite the extraordinary miracle of a black president in the White House and of Oprah Winfrey and a group of black folk who head up Fortune 500 companies, I think the black child and family, the black child faces the worst crisis since slavery, and that we've got to do something about it. The toxic cocktail of poverty, of illiteracy, of continued racial disparities, of violence, of massive incarceration, that is sentencing millions of our children to dead-end lives and to social and economic death. The fact that 85%, over 80%, close to 85% of our black children cannot read at grade level in 4th, 8th, or 12th grade is a disaster. You can't function in this globalizing economy if you can't read and compute at the most basic levels. Black boys, we all know, born in 2001, has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison. And millions of their fathers and mothers are already in prison. We've got to break the incarceration of our people, which is, we call the new apartheid. And you'll hear from Michelle Alexander tomorrow, who's going to talk about it being the new Jim Crow. We have got to change the prison industrial complex. We've got to stop this regression and jailing of our children at younger and younger ages. We're criminalizing 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds, and yet we're silent when these children are suspended for things that used to be handled in the principal's office. There are children sitting up in youth prisons and juvenile detention facilities in New York and all over at a cost of $250,000 a year, as young as 9 years old, with an 89% recidivism rate for nonviolent offenses, and we're standing for it. We ought to be tearing down those jail doors. We need to be closing these youth prisons, and we ought to be challenging a nation whose priorities are to spend 3 times more to lock our children up and to imprison people than to give them an early education or to educate them. Where is our voice? That's why we are here, to determine how we're going to find our voice, to break up this cradle to prison pipeline and replace it with a pipeline to college and productive work and to hope, because if we don't, we're going to go backwards and backwards, and how unworthy of us to have that happen, how unworthy of our nation. And we need to deal with the growing child poverty. Our children, or the poor children in single-parent families, the youngest poor children, are the poorest children in America, and 40% of black children are living, only fewer than 40% of our children living in two-parent families. We have got to reweave our fabric of family. 70% of our babies are being born to never married mothers, and if they haven't had a high school education, the downward mobility again has got to be stopped. All of these figures are laid out in your folder in a portrait of inequality. Look at it, think about it, cry about it, and determine that you're going to do something about it. It's very disturbing, but we cannot go backwards. We must go forward. And that's why we've got to build this movement, to let our children know that we're there, to know that we're going to speak to them, and we need to speak to the nation and say we cannot afford to keep incarcerating our children, that with budget crises like this, the last thing we need to do is continue to spend tens of billions of dollars to lock people up. And whether or not we like these poor and black and brown children, they are going to be a majority of our child population by 2023, and we're going to need them. I'd rather have them working for us and have them educated. So we need to go out and make the case that how we can save our children and save our nation's soul, but also save a whole lot of money and prepare a competitive workforce. We've got to go out there and make that case. So I just am so grateful that you have come to take up the next phase of this movement to save all of our children, to save black children, to save America's soul. And I have no doubt that we have whatever it takes to do whatever is needed. When you look back at the small band of lawyers and the small band of brave parents who wanted their children to have a better life, they didn't have a lot of money, but they had a whole lot of courage and they had a vision of a better future for their children. I can't imagine that we can't do better and step up to the plate and do whatever we've got to do now to save our children and to move them ahead, and that's why we are here.